Hello and a very warm welcome to the Analyst dated 27th August 2026, brought to you by Vajiram and Ravi, wherein we'll be looking into the sixth set of current affairs article along with the mains value addition article. And the handout of this very discussion has been pinned in the comment section below for a future reference. Now, beginning with the analysis section in the first topic, we'll try and understand that how India and China are trying to navigate their strategic rivalry. What are the areas of cooperation? What are the bone of contentions between the two countries? And what steps need to be taken in order to restore our ties with one of our key neighbor? Moving on to the second topic, herein we'll try and understand that why there's a need for private investment when it comes to the healthcare, what all challenges it is creating when it comes to the affordability of the healthcare services, and what steps needs to be taken in order to ensure effective realization of Sustainable Development Goal number 3. Then we'll be looking into a mains value addition article, which is related to R&D ecosystem, what all challenges we are facing in that respect, and what is a new initiative taken by Niti Aayog in this respect. We'll be covering that in detail. And lastly, we will be covering 4 prelim pointers, wherein the value addition has been done, keeping in mind the prelim stage of the examination, so stay tuned. Now, let's begin with the first topic, which is dealing with the evolving dynamics of India-China relation. This is something that you can associate with GS paper 2, wherein we have the topic India and its neighborhood relation. Now, you must be thinking that why are we discussing about India-China relation today? The reason being, recently, the 25th round of talks between the special representatives from the two countries recently got concluded, and this meeting was held in Beijing, China. What was the outcome of this particular meeting? So when it comes to this particular meeting, the outcome was that let's not wait for the border dispute to get over on all the fronts. Western front, Eastern front, and the middle sector. So when it comes to India and China, we don't have much dispute when it comes to the middle sector. So that is why the two countries have agreed on this thing, that in the future meetings, we will be finalizing the LAC when it comes to the middle sector, that is Himachal Pradesh and Uttarakhand. Let's not wait for the border dispute to get over on the western and the eastern front. Then the two countries have also agreed on this particular thing, that we will be taking requisite measures to enhance the confidence. For that, the two countries have agreed on opening 2 new border military hotlines. One would be in the eastern sector and the other one would be in the middle sector. And 2 new meeting points for military commander level meeting would be organized on a regular basis so that we can prevent escalation, okay? So that if there is aggression from one side, de-escalation measures could be taken on a timely basis. And after the Doklam standoff, which took place in 2017, China has stopped sharing the hydrological data with respect to the flow of Brahmaputra river. That created problems for India because we are witnessing recurring flood situation in the state of Assam. So now the two countries have agreed that in the future meetings, we would be finalizing an agreement with respect to effective and periodical sharing of the hydrological data with respect to the flow of Brahmaputra river. So these were the major outcomes. When it comes to India, India was represented by our National Security Advisor, that is Mr. Ajit Doval, and China was represented by their foreign minister. Now, in this respect, what becomes important is, why is China crucial for us? First and the foremost reason is the economic factor. You look at the bilateral trade between the two countries. It is more than 150 billion. If you talk about the financial year 25-26. And when it comes to India, although we are a major supplier of generic drugs to the world, but when it comes to the critical input that is needed in our pharmaceutical sector is the active pharmaceutical ingredient. And for this, we are dependent upon China. Then, from energy security point of view also, we are dependent upon China. Why? Because we import the solar modules as well as solar cells from China. And China has the 90% of the processing capacity when it comes to the rare earth elements, which are very much needed when it comes to the renewable sector, when it comes to creating cutting edge technologies, okay? And for effective and smooth green transition also, India needs support of China. As highlighted by the Economic Survey of 24-25, that India imports 75% of lithium-ion batteries from China, which is needed for smooth transition towards the idea of electric vehicles. Then, the two countries are trying to reduce the Western dominance when it comes to the global affairs. So, The two countries are the top shareholders when you talk about the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which is emerging as a major player when it comes to providing the loan for infrastructure creation in the Asian countries. And through this, we are trying to reduce the dominance of Western countries with the, reducing the role of World Bank and IMF. Then the two countries are collaborating with respect to de-dollarization effort. What is de-dollarization effort? First, you need to understand that how the bilateral trade takes place currently. Now, whenever we are importing something from any other country, no country is ready to accept Indian rupee in exchange. Another country is ready to accept only dollars. So what happens that at times US tries to weaponize this dollar thing. And whenever Indian rupee loses its value or whenever the Indian rupee depreciates, then what is the problem? Then whatever import you are doing, it becomes more and more costly. So to reduce our dependence upon the dollar and to reduce the impact on the macroeconomic stability because of the exchange rate fluctuations, what the two countries are planning to do? China and India, they both agree on this particular front of de-dollarization. And that is why the two countries are exploring using local currencies when it comes to settling the bilateral trade. And the two countries also came up with the idea that we will come up with a new BRICS currency. Okay, that would enable us to reduce the dependence upon dollar. Then the two countries are giving a joint resistance to Western protectionism when it comes to the climate negotiations. What do I mean by this? Now, the two countries, India and China, they are a part of the basic bloc, which also have other countries like Brazil and South Africa. Now, this particular grouping uphold the principle of common but differentiated responsibility. What do I mean by this particular principle? See, the developed economies like US, like European Union, they were the one who contributed more when it comes to CO2 emissions. So, they should be the one who should be providing the climate finance so that developing economies like India and China, they can make a smooth transition and they can meet their climate goals. And they should also be providing these developing economies with the requisite clean technology also. So the investment or the money which the developed economies like US and European Union has to put in, that would not be the same that the developing economies like India and China would be putting up. Okay, so these developed economy who were the major contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, they need to provide the requisite climate finance and the clean technology to the developing economies. And when it comes to the COP 2026, in this the two countries turned down this demand from the developed economies that when it comes to the developing economies, they need to completely phase out the coal. But India and China gave a joint resistance to this particular demand, and ultimately all the countries at COP26 agreed on this particular thing that we will not be going for coal phase out, rather we will be going for phase down of coal. Phase down of coal means that over a period of time, we will reduce our consumption of coal or our dependence upon coal when it comes to creation of energy. Complete phase out of coal is not going to happen. This is something which was demanded by the developed countries. But India and China, they gave a joint resistance to this particular demand, and ultimately the developed countries also have to agree on this particular front that we cannot go for the phase out of coal, rather we will be going for phase down of coal. Then the two countries are collaborating on the terrorism front also, as the two countries are part of SCO framework. And the two countries collaborate effectively when it comes to the RATS framework of SCO, that is Regional Anti-Terrorist Structure. This is a platform which facilitates intelligence sharing among the two countries, joint cyber defense exercises and anti-terror drills also. Then another common point where the two countries can collaborate with each other is the India-Russia-China triangle. If you people have been following the newspaper recently, you must be aware of the Trump policies of unilateral sanctions. Now, US has said that they are going to increase the tariff rate on the Chinese goods which are entering into the US market. Why? Because China rely on forced labor. So, since they are getting the cost advantage because of this forced labor, we are going to negate this by increasing the tariff. And the similar story goes for India also. US has said that since India is helping China, how? China is sending the goods to India, and what India is doing, India is then exporting those goods to US. And that is why US is going to raise tariff on India. Similarly, US has said that we are going to impose tariff on India. Why? Because you are importing discounted crude oil from Russia. And that is enabling Russia to continue the Russia-Ukraine war. So if these three countries come together, they can not just expand their investment and trade among each other, but they can also give a befitting reply to the unilateral sanctions which are imposed by US time and again. Last area of cooperation is the cultural domain. Now the two countries came up with the pair of sister cities and provinces, like Fujian province was clubbed with Tamil Nadu state and Zhuangzhou city with Chennai city. We also have a yoga college in China. So this people-to-people cultural exchange enables us to strengthen the bilateral relation between the two countries. Now, having understood the areas of cooperation, what are the bone of contention between the two countries? Let's try and understand. First and the foremost problem is the China salami slicing strategy. What is this salami slicing strategy? Let's try and understand. Let's suppose this is your LSE. Here we have China, here we have India. Now, under the salami slicing strategy, what China would start doing, it would put in place dual villages. Okay, initially it would settle its people till here, then slowly it would increase the villages extend till here and then here. And that is how over a period of time it would claim that this much area is under China's control. Earlier they were here, but now they'll say that till this, since our people are living at this particular point, so this entire area comes under China's control. Okay, at one go, they are not going to increase their foothold. So this is what is salami slicing strategy. That is how they increase their territorial claims. If you people have been following the newspaper, you must have heard about what China is doing in the South China Sea recently. It has created artificial islands and then it is claiming that these islands belong to us. So this is how China keeps on increasing its territorial claims, be it India, be it the South China Sea. Then, as we all know, that the two countries have not agreed on the LSE. We still have disputes when it comes to the Western Front. Why? Because India claims that Askai Chin belongs to us, because India follows the Johnson line, but China goes with the McDonald line. According to McDonald line, Askai Chin is a part of China. According to India, following the Johnson line, according to Johnson line, Askai Chin is a part of India. That is why the border dispute is there when it comes to the Western Front. When it comes to the Eastern Front, China time and again claim that Arunachal Pradesh is a part of its Tibet region. Okay, so time and again it refers Arunachal Pradesh as South Tibet. And you must have followed the newspaper wherein China time and again come up with the map and therein it shows that yes, Arunachal Pradesh is a part of China. Okay, so these are the border disputes between the two countries. Then let's come into the economic domain. Therein also the trade deficit is quite high. When it comes to India, the bilateral trade is quite good when it comes to China. But the problem is we are exporting less to China, but we are importing more from China, be it active pharmaceutical ingredients, be it lithium-ion batteries, okay, be it solar panels, etc. So that is why the trade deficit has increased to more than 100 billion in financial year 25-26. And another problem is when it comes to Indian exporters, why we are not able to export more to China market? The reason being China time and again resort to non-tariff barriers. That means the quality is not up to the mark, phytosanitary measures when it comes to the agriculture products. And that is why when it comes to the exporters from India, they are not able to export more to China, and that is the reason we have a huge trade deficit. Another problem is dumping of goods. Now, India and ASEAN also have trade agreement with each other, but what we have found out is that China used to dump the product in ASEAN countries, and then what ASEAN countries used to do, since they have a FTA or a trade agreement with India, so what they used to do, they used to just change the label. that it is not from China, it is actually from an Asian country. And on the basis of the trade agreement that India and ASEAN have between each other, these goods were able to get a favorable treatment. That means the tariff level was quite low when they were entering into the Indian market. And that is how China was able to dump its goods in the Indian market via the ASEAN countries. So that is another problem. By the way, what is dumping? Dumping is when it comes to a particular product, in the domestic market, it might be sold, let's suppose, at rupees 50, but when the same product China would be dumping in India, it would be sold at maybe 200 rupees. So it would be sold at a very less price. The price at which it is selling that product in India might be less than the cost of production also. Why? To basically, wipe out all the other competitors. And once the competitors would be out, then you can increase the prices. Then another problem is the two-front war that we face. Why? Because you all know that China has favorable relation with our neighboring country, that is Pakistan. And this was something which turned out to be very problematic during the Operation Sindoor. China later on admitted that yes, it provided support to the Pakistan during Operation Sindoor. So we continuously face a threat of two-front war. One war from China side, another war from Pakistan side. And the problem is both of these countries are nuclear weapon states. Another problem is the CPEC corridor, which passes through the Pakistan occupied Kashmir. And in this respect, India has raised concern. Why? Because this China-Pakistan economic corridor violates India's territorial sovereignty. And it also goes against the Panchsheel agreement, which the two countries have signed way back in 1954. That is, they'll be respecting the territorial integrity or sovereignty of each other. Now, another, front of rivalry between the two countries is the Indo-Pacific region. Now, what China does under its string of pearl strategy is it develops dual-use ports in our neighboring countries. And by developing these ports, what it is trying to do, it is trying to encircle India like this. Okay. Now, why India is raising concern? Because currently China is saying that, yes, it is just a port that we have created by giving the loan to, let's suppose, countries like Sri Lanka. Therein, China has got the lease for Hambantota port. Then take example of Gwadar port, Pakistan. So China is saying that we are simply developing port. Okay, this would give a boost to our trade, but India has raised concern. Why? Because these ports are of dual use. And on what basis we are saying this? Recently, one of the Chinese vessel, that is Yuan Wang class, was seen near the Hambantota port in Sri Lanka. Now, China said that it is merely a research vessel. So it was doing the research in the, Indo-Pacific region. But India has raised concern with respect to the presence of this particular vessel. Why? Because this vessel can effectively trace that what all missiles are being launched by India. So you understand this thing, that why India is raising this concern with respect to the ports being developed by the China under its string of pearl strategy or under its Belt and Road Initiative. Because these ports are of dual use. In future, China might be using it for military purposes. And that could jeopardize the security interest of India, especially in the Indo-Pacific region. Then, to counter this, what India is doing, India has its own necklace of diamond strategy. So what India is doing, India is setting up its own military bases and, it is strengthening its naval ties with countries like Oman. Here we have put in place Dugam port. In Iran, we have created the Chabar port. So like this, we are also trying to encircle China like this, as you can see in this particular picture. Sabang port in Indonesia. So that is why these two countries have not just, conflict when it comes to the land boundary, but the two countries also have rivalry when it comes to establishing their influence or the dominance when it comes to the Indo-Pacific region. Now, another problematic area is the water security. Why it is problematic? Because I told you earlier, China used to share the hydrological data with respect to Brahmaputra with India. But after the Doklam standoff, it stopped sharing this particular data. And this creates a problem for India. Why? Because China has now proposed that it is going to develop a mega dam on the Brahmaputra river. Now, this could be problematic. You are going to develop a dam. Whenever the flow would be higher in the Brahmaputra river, you will release that water. And you are not sharing the data with us also. So we cannot make the requisite arrangement also when it comes to states like Assam, which are frequently witnessing flood-like situation. So this is another bone of contention between India and China. And lastly, China is the one which is continuously blocking India's bid for a permanent seat when it comes to the UNSC, that is UN Security Council, and it is also blocking India membership when it comes to nuclear supply group. When it comes to nuclear supply group, in this the decision has to be taken based on consensus. The other countries when it comes to nuclear supply group are ready to give the membership to India, but China is not ready to give the membership to India. And China, on what basis it is saying that India should not be provided with the membership of nuclear supply group? The reason being India has not signed the NPT, Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which says that only 5 countries would be having the nuclear technology. And these 5 countries are not going to share the nuclear technology with other non-nuclear states. Okay, which are these 5 countries? You need to let me know in the comment section. And when it comes to the non-nuclear states, they have to agree once they sign this NPT treaty that they are not going to develop the nuclear technology. So India thinks that it is discriminatory. Why are you creating have and have-nots when it comes to nuclear technology? And why should India not develop nuclear technology? Because the 2 neighbors that we have, Pakistan and China, they both are nuclear weapon states. So if we sign this treaty, then it could jeopardize our security. And China is also saying that if you allow India to be a member of this NSG group, you also need to admit Pakistan, because Pakistan has also not signed this NPT. So let's admit Pakistan also. So that is how it creates blockade for India when it comes to these particular institutions. Now, what needs to be done ahead? First of all, we need to ensure that the confidence is strengthened among the 2 countries. So for that, track 2 diplomacy should be put in place. A regular meeting between the military commanders should be taking place so that in a timely manner, we are able to ensure that de-escalation measures are taken. Then when it comes to the economic front, we can go for co-locate and substitute investment strategy. So under this, Chinese firms should be allowed to invest only if they partner with one of the domestic companies. Okay, when it comes to setting up manufacturing plants. Then we need to enhance the border management mechanism. So confidence building measures like the flag meetings, military hotlines that we have put in place in the middle sector and the eastern front, and border personnel meeting should be there to prevent escalation. And in this respect, India also need to pay attention to the border infrastructure. In this respect, effective implementation of vibrant village program is the need of the hour. Vibrant village program would ensure effective connectivity with the border districts. Okay, so that smoothly supplies could be provided if and all war is open up when it comes to China. So we need to ensure that the border is effectively fenced, and effective implementation of this vibrant village program is the need of the hour to ensure effective road connectivity in the border districts. Then we need to expand our economic and trade ties. For this, we need to, constantly have a negotiation with China with respect to the non-tariff barriers which are imposed by the Chinese government when it comes to the goods which India is trying to export to China. And we should also have word with the China for relaxing its export control when it comes to the rare earth elements, which are very much needed, okay, to create cutting edge technology nowadays, for example, semiconductor and all. Then we need to strengthen the people-to-people ties, as the 2 countries have agreed that direct flights, and the 2 countries have also agreed that the Kailash Mansarovar Yatra would be started from this year. So such cultural ties should be strengthened, because when the people-to-people ties are strong, it is very difficult for the 2 countries to actually enter into a phase of war. Lastly, India needs to leverage the China plus 1 strategy. What is China plus 1 strategy? We all know US and China, they are constantly in a war domain, especially in the economic front. So what the US companies are trying to do, they are trying to shift their base from China. So that is what is China plus 1 strategy. They are trying to put their manufacturing base in a country which usually have a friendly relation with US. So we need to exploit this China plus 1 strategy, and we need to ensure that more and more FDI is coming into India. And we have taken requisite steps in this respect. This is something that I'll be discussing with you in the prelim pointers. Okay, that why currently the FDI has increased so much in the recent times. What strategy we have taken in order to exploit this China plus 1 strategy. Lastly, as highlighted by the Honorable Prime Minister, that let's not make competition turn into a conflict. Strategic maturity is the need of the hour. That's all that we need to know when it comes to this particular topic. I have framed a practice question for you people, so do practice this question. And with this, let's move on to the next topic. Now, let's begin with the second topic, which is dealing with the high cost of India's private healthcare. This is something that we can again associate with GS paper 2, wherein we have the health topic. Now, the recent context is that the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Health and Family Welfare in its recent report has rightly pointed out that the average cost of hospitalization in the private hospital and the public hospital, that gap is getting widened. If you get the facility in a private hospital, the cost would be more than 50,000. If you get the same facility in a government hospital, the cost would be less than 7,000. Why this discrepancy in the cost exists? Let's try and understand. Now, what are the causes of rising medical inflation in India? Why the health services are becoming more and more costly? The first reason is the rising cost of medical education. Now, WHO has put in front of us the benchmark. What is the ideal benchmark? That for every 1,000 people, you need one doctor. Okay, now to meet this particular benchmark, more and more medical education institutions has come up. Now, the private medical education institution, obviously, the fee is going to be very high. Now, the people from the middle income sector, when they get the medical education, they might have taken the loan. And when they get employed as doctor, now they become the perfect target for the private healthcare centers. They employ these people, and since these people have to repay the earlier loan, educational loan that they have taken to get this medical education, now the hospital would tell them that you will be getting the salary based on the revenue that you will help us generate. So the revenue generation would be one benchmark based on which the salaries of these people who have right now just become a part of the private healthcare sector would be determined. And that is the reason unnecessary test and referral is told to you. Because in the health sector, the problem is you don't know that which all test is needed to effectively diagnose the disease that you're suffering from. It is only the doctor who know that. And this information asymmetry is something which is exploited by the healthcare sectors. And that is the reason they actually inflate your medical bill. Then another problem is rapidly evolving medical technology. Now, to come up with better and advanced medical technology, you need to do R&D. So the company who has made that medical technology would obviously be charging you a higher money. And another problem is when it comes to India, majority of the new medical technology is something that we import from other countries. That is another reason why the medical bills are getting inflated, because if you're importing these medical devices from abroad, the price is going to be high, and the prices have further escalated. Why? Because of the blockade that we are still witnessing in the Strait of Hormuz region. Another problem is currently in India, we have a sedentary lifestyle. You people being a UPSC aspirant, just tell me in the comment section how many of you actually invest 1 hour per day for your physical and mental health. There are going to be very less students. And because of this, what is happening is, as highlighted by the economic survey of 25-26, is that more than 57% of all deaths in the country is happening because of non-communicable diseases like severe diseases, heart stroke, okay, the kidney diseases, etc. Wherein the treatment cost is quite higher because of the sedentary lifestyle. And it is also because we are not paying due attention to the primary healthcare. Why attention to primary healthcare is the need of the hour? Because if your primary healthcare is effective, it would be able to detect the disease at an early stage. And if the disease is detected at an early stage, obviously the hospitalization cost would be comparatively less. So if, let's suppose, consider a cancer patient. If the cancer is diagnosed at level 1 or at level 2, obviously the medical bill that the hospital would be giving to you would be comparatively less if you have reached at the last stage of cancer. That is why investing in the primary healthcare center is the need of the hour for early detection of the disease and for taking preventive steps in that respect. Another problem is the rising pharmaceutical inflation. Why the pharmaceutical inflation is on a rise? The reason being there is lack of frequent revision when it comes to the national list of essential medicines. Now, this list currently covers more than 300 drugs. But when you talk about the WHO list of essential medicines, it covers more than 500 drugs. Now, what is this essential list all about? This list of essential medicines, herein the government is going to cap the maximum price that could be charged by the companies, okay, because the government is of this view that we need to ensure that these essential medicines are affordable to the public. But when it comes to the list which are when it comes to the medicines which are outside this list, their price cannot be effectively regulated. So that is why more and more drugs needs to be incorporated into this particular list, and frequent revision of this particular list is the need of the hour. Then another problem is the profit-driven model of the private hospitals. Now, to regulate the bills that the private hospitals can charge on you whenever they are carrying out any particular medical procedure, the government has come up with the Clinical Establishment Registration and Regulation Act. Under this particular act, the central government and the state government, through consultation, they decided that, okay, if a particular medical procedure A is being carried out, what should be the cost? And the private hospitals or the laboratories, they cannot charge you higher than this. But the problem is there is ineffective implementation of this particular act. That is the reason the private hospitals are continue to work upon the profit-driven models. Since you being a patient, you don't have the idea that what all tests are required, and that is what is exploited by the doctors in this respect. I am not talking about all the doctors, but this is majorly the situation which is happening, which is taking place in majority of the private hospitals in India. Unnecessary C-sections are being conducted, okay, rather than carrying out normal delivery. So unnecessary tests and all are being recommended by the doctors, and that inflates your medical bill. Then another problem is that when it comes to the people who have health insurance, they too can easily cover the inflated medical bill. But what about the people who don't have any medical insurance cover? In this respect, Niti Aayog has pointed out that in India, 40 crore people are a part of the missing middle. What do we mean by missing middle? See, when it comes to the poor sections, they are covered under the Pradhan Mantri Ayushman Bharat Yojana. When it comes to the upper income sector, okay, there the people have their private insurance cover. But what about the people who are in the middle income zone? They are not covered under the government insurance program, and they are not in a position that they can afford a private insurance cover. So when these people, any member of their family get infected by such non-communicable diseases, then it becomes difficult for such families to come out of the poverty. And another problem with the insurance coverage is that there is lack of comprehensive coverage. Now the health insurance, lot of exception clauses are there. When you take a health insurance, you don't have that much of time that you read all the clauses. And ultimately, even when you have taken a health insurance coverage, then also it might happen that the out-of-pocket expenditure you have to do on the medicines, the outpatient care, rehabilitative therapy, that might not be covered in the insurance policy. Another problem is that there is lack of effective public health infrastructure. This is because of the low public expenditure being done by the government. Less than 2% of our GDP is actually being spent on the public health. And that is the reason the private sector is coming up and it is filling the gap. And if it is filling the gap, it is also going to get the returns. So it is the private sector which is setting the higher prices for the medical services. Now, do we actually need private investment? The answer is yes. It is a necessary evil because the public health infrastructure is not well developed. And if you look at the rural areas, we have almost a shortage of 80% of the specialist doctors when it comes to the tier 2, tier 3 cities. So if you want the quality healthcare services being provided in tier 2, tier 3 and in rural areas, we need the private investment in this respect. And for the hospitals, they have to acquire land. High cutting edge medical devices needs to be acquired, better specialists needs to be acquired, and all this is expensive. So at the end of the day, we need private investment in the healthcare. But the problem is when the prices of the medical services are charged based on the profit and not based on the services that are being provided, or they are not guided by the medical needs. What is the impact ultimately? The impact is families fall below the poverty line, and it becomes difficult for these families to come out of the vicious cycle of poverty, especially for the missing middle. the people who are in the middle income group, and they cannot afford a private health insurance coverage, and they are also not covered under the Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana. Then another problem is when the medical bills are quite inflated, this leads to erosion of our fundamental rights. Why am I saying this? Because the Supreme Court has rightly upheld that right to healthcare is an integral fundamental right under Article 21. This was the judgment given by the Supreme Court way back in 1995 in Consumer Education and Research Center versus Union of India case. And in 2020, the Supreme Court stated that right to affordable healthcare is an integral part of right to health. So it is a responsibility of the government to ensure that there is some sort of capping being put in place when it comes to the medical services being provided by the private sector. And if the medical bills are inflated, what happens? We are unable to attain this idea of universal health coverage, which simply means that the 3 A's needs to be met: availability, accessibility, and affordability. But when the medical bills are getting inflated, what happens? The medical services no more remain affordable. And lastly, this severely dampens our transition towards the Sustainable Development Goal number 3, which talks about good health and well-being. Now, what needs to be done to ensure that we don't get a inflated medical bill? At an individual level, what we can do? We can follow an active lifestyle. 1 hour every day you are supposed to give to your physical and mental health. And on a periodic basis, get a screening against all the common illness. Now let's look into that what all steps are needed at the hospital level. So when it comes to giving the reimbursement to the hospitals, okay, when it comes to a patient who has the health insurance coverage, on what basis the reimbursement to the hospital should be decided? So for reimbursement, we should establish a diagnosis related groups, wherein the patient would be classified based on the services that they got. Let's suppose any particular surgery A, we have fixed the cost that, okay, you will be getting 50,000 for carrying out the surgery. Now, if the cost is fixed, then the hospital would not be having the incentive to, make you do a lot of laboratory tests. So if the hospital is able to do this particular procedure within 45,000, let's suppose, then also the hospital would be getting 50,000 only. Okay, so here the hospital would be able to make a profit of 5,000. But if the hospital carry out the same procedure, let's suppose in 60,000, then also the reimbursement would be equal to 50,000, because that is what diagnosis related groups means, that the hospital reimbursement needs to be standardized and it needs to be fixed and it needs to be predetermined based on the diagnosis and the procedure that are being followed. Okay, so if these two hospitals, this one which did the same surgery with in 45,000 and the another hospital which did the same procedure with a cost of 60,000, both would be getting only 50,000. So do you think if we go with the diagnosis related group, the hospitals would be having this incentive to tell you to undertake a lot of laboratory tests? The answer is no. They will be having the incentive that let's try and conduct the same surgery or the same diagnosis or the same procedure within less amount so that we can make this profit, because the amount that we'll be getting under the insurance policy that is there, that is going to remain fixed. So this is something that we can do to put a check on the rising medical inflation. Then, to effectively monitor what all prices are being charged for each services, we need to put in place a hospital level ethics committee also, so that they can, on a continuous basis, on a periodic basis, they should be examining the professional fees and what all fees they are charging for a particular service. Okay. Then the hospitals can go for cross subsidization. Now this is a word that you must have heard in respect to Indian Railways, how Indian Railways actually operate. When it comes to the passenger trains which are being run, there the Indian Railway is not able to make higher profit. It is in the goods train where it is able to make profit. So the profit that it is making through by running the good trains, that same profit it is using to provide you the journey at a subsidized rate when it comes to the passenger trains. The same logic we can apply when it comes to the healthcare. So the hospitals which are earning higher revenue from medical tourism, from foreign patient, high net worth individual, this revenue should be used to provide the healthcare services at a subsidized rate to the poor patient, so that we can make sure that when it comes to a poor patient, it should not be a last resort for them that they have to go and visit the public healthcare centers. Okay. Then we need to ensure that quality healthcare facilities are also available in tier 2, tier 3 as well as rural areas. For that, the government can provide some sort of tax holidays. That is what the standing committee has recommended. And we should also explore PPP, public-private participation projects. Then, as the OECD countries has, their experience clearly point out that if you want to regulate the prices when it comes to the healthcare services, you need to put in place an effective public healthcare infrastructure. For this, the government need to increase the expenditure that it is currently undergoing when it comes to the public healthcare infrastructure. So we need to increase the expenditure at least till 2.5% of the GDP. Then we need to strengthen the primary healthcare centers. Why? So that the disease could be diagnosed at an early stage, adequate preventive steps could be taken, and that is how the medical bill could be reduced. And lastly, when it comes to addressing the pharmaceutical inflation, I already told you that we need to regularly revise this national list of essential medicines, and we need to expand the number of drugs which is being covered under this particular list so that we can cap the pharmaceutical inflation as well. So in the long run, the true measure of India's healthcare progress would be whether an Indian citizen can enter them with confidence that they will receive what they need, not more, not less, despite the fact that there is information asymmetry when it comes to the healthcare services. That's all that we need to know when it comes to this particular topic. Why this topic becomes important, as you can see, UPSC has asked a question on similar lines when it comes to rising medical inflation. And based on the discussion that we have, I have also framed a practice question for you people. So do practice this question. And with this, let's move on to the mains value addition part. Now, when it comes to the aspect that we are going to discuss under this mains value addition, this is something that you can write wherever you are talking about the R&D ecosystem in India. Now, what is the problem which Niti Aayog in its recent report of ease of doing R&D India has pointed out? That when it comes to R&D ecosystem in India, we don't have any database which could tell us who is being funded, by whom, for what purpose, and whether that funding has already been given elsewhere or there is duplication of funding. We don't have any such, mechanism in place which could tell us or which could answer all these relevant questions. Now, why answering these questions become important? The reason being, if you see, these are the findings highlighted by the Niti Aayog itself, that if you go by Anusandhan National Research Foundation, its mandate is to wider the funding support to different universities and research bodies. But what Niti Aayog in its finding has pointed out, that this body is providing 80% of the funding to the IITs only. So what is getting impacted is majority of the funding is coming to only one institute. We don't, we are not in a position to provide funding to different research bodies. So that is negatively impacting the R&D ecosystem in India. Then another problem is, since we don't have any mechanism to tell us that whether for a particular project A, the funding is also coming from some other source, because of this, what happens is there is duplication of effort, and that leads to inefficient use of public money. Okay, because a similar research project might get funding from 3 different sources. The same funding could be used to finance some other research work. And another problem is, why this problem is there? Because of the scattered database that we have. Database is being maintained by Department of Science and Technology also, as well as Council for Scientific and Industrial Research. But the problem is, there is no interoperability between these 2 data sets, which could effectively answer these prominent questions, which the Niti Aayog report rightly points out. Now, to effectively address this gap, what Niti Aayog has suggested, that let's create a unified project management system, which is going to give an effective answer to all these questions. Who is being funded, by whom, and whether the funding has already been given for a particular project from other sources as well. So this would ensure effective monitoring and evaluation of the R&D projects across ministries and departments. Now, let's try and understand in simple terms what Niti Aayog has actually proposed under this unified project management system. So just like you can effectively identify a taxpayer through a PAN card number, similarly, for effectively tracing the R&D grants that are given for different research work, we are going to come up with a persistent digital identifier, which means that each research grant in India will have a permanent, unique, machine-readable identifier. Okay? So, with this unique, persistent digital identifier, what we are trying to attain? We are going to get answer to all these questions. That which agency gave the money to which institution, to which named researcher, what was the amount, for what period the grant was given, and in which field, so that we can make sure that adequate funding is provided to different fields. And finally, we will be linking all this database, and this would allow the officials to track that ultimately what was the outcome of the grant that we have given. Because when a researcher publishes its research, it has to include the PID in it. And with this, we will be able to effectively monitor the outcome of the funding that was provided. Now, in this respect, we also have an international best practice, that is grant linking system, which was developed by a non-profit organization, that is Crossref. And this is something which is used by different countries. Now, in this respect, you need to make note of these two terms, that is Research Organization Registry, which is going to tell us which institution has received the funding, and another is ORCID identifier. In simple term, this is going to tell us that which is the individual researcher which got the funding. Okay. Now, the idea that was proposed to us by the Niti Aayog, how we can implement that in practical terms. So, we have three ways to attain this, okay, to address this database gap that we have currently in the R&D ecosystem. One method is that let's create an altogether new sovereign national research grant registry. Okay. So India would own this infrastructure, and we can obviously, since we are creating this new sovereign national research grant registry, we can, tweak it, or we can tailor it according to our specific needs. Another mechanism is let's follow the Crossref ecosystem, because already the mechanism is in place. All we have to do is we have to consistently deposit the data with the Crossref ecosystem. And the benefit of this would be we will be able to compare at the global level that whatever grants we are providing, what is the final outcome and what is the scenario at the global level. The middle path is what is being followed in European Union countries as well as UK. Therein, the countries have their own government-owned portal. So all the research institutions and the universities, wherever the grants are provided for research, they are, providing this data when it comes to this government-owned portal. But when it comes to this particular portal, it has the ability to generate the identifier which is compatible with the identifier generated by this Crossref ecosystem. That means it is able to tell us which institution got the funding and which individual researcher got the funding. And with a tracing mechanism, we are able to trace that what was the ultimate outcome of the grant that was given. Okay. So this is what that we have to look into when it comes to the mains value addition article. With this, let's move on to the prelim pointers. Now, beginning with the prelim pointers, the first article is dealing with the gross FDI, which has hit 15-year high. So we have received the FDI more than 300 billion. This is something that you can associate with the economy section of a prelim syllabus. Now, as you can see with the help of this particular graph, that the gross inflow of FDI is higher as compared to the gross outflow. And that is the reason the RBI has pointed out that the net FDI is highest if you compare from June 2022. And why it is so? Because the outward FDI, which was being done by the Indian firms, that has gone down. And you can just see the countries from where the FDI is coming, that is Singapore, Netherlands, US, Canada, which account for almost 74% of the inflow. And one great trend that we have now witnessed is that manufacturing sector has received the highest share of inflow. Normally it is the service sector, but this time it is the manufacturing sector which has received the highest share of FDI. Now, the first thing that we need to understand with respect to this particular article is what is FDI and what is FPI. Now, Arvind Mayram panel has given the definition for FDI and FPI. So, this panel stated that when it comes to the listed company, if the foreign investor is investing or it is holding
more than 10% of the paid up equity capital, then in this case, we will call it as FDI. But if it is less than 10%, okay, in this case, we will call it as FPI. When it comes to unlisted company, okay, whose stocks are not listed on the stock exchange, for example, Zerodha, Serum Institute of India, any investment, any foreign investment which is coming into these companies, that would be FDI. There is no distinction of FPI and FDI when it comes to unlisted company. This distinction of 10% threshold is there with respect to listed companies whose stocks are listed on the stock exchange. Now you must be thinking that, ma'am, what is this paid up equity capital? Let's understand this particular concept with the help of a glass of water. Now just imagine that this is a glass and the water is filled to this level. Now the maximum level till which I can fill this glass, this is authorized capital. Authorized capital means the maximum amount of money which a company can raise by issuing the maximum amount of shares. So in simple terms, it refers to the maximum amount of shares a company can issue and the capital in return it can raise. What is paid up equity capital? It refers to the actual amount of shares which the company has issued in the market, and in return, what is the capital that it has been able to raise. So based on this paid up equity capital, the FDI and FPI is distinguished. Okay, so we have done the definition part. Now, investment horizon. We all know that FDI come for a longer period of time, usually more than 1 year. But when it comes to FPI, it could be 1 day also, it could be 2 days also. So the investment horizon is very less. Okay, they are merely coming for profit motive. And that is why FPI is also referred to be as hot money. So if you are getting more FPI, it could be problematic because the moment something goes wrong, they would be the first to leave your country. So if you get a question that what do you mean by hot money? So it is your FPI, foreign portfolio investment. When you talk about the control, so a foreign investor who is bringing FDI intends to have managerial control in that particular Indian company. So the control would be higher in FDI. There is no such control in FPI because the number of shares that the foreign investor is holding, it is quite less than 10%. Then when you talk about the risk factor, so when it comes to FDI, if something goes wrong in India, it would be the foreign investors who have brought FDI into India, they are at risk. I am talking with respect to the host country. With respect to India, if something goes wrong in India, the foreign investor who has brought FDI in India, they'll not be able to take out that money easily. But when it comes to FPI, they'll be able to take out the money easily. But if you talk from the perspective of the impact on India, what would happen? Now, FDI is comparatively more stable, whereas FPI, we discussed, it is a hot money. So, from the point of view of India, the risk would be comparatively higher in case of FPI. So if more FPI is coming, it could be, riskier. Why? Because if something goes wrong in India, they will be the first to leave their country. But if you talk from the point of view of foreign investors, in that case, the risk for the foreign investors is higher if they are bringing FDI, and the risk is comparatively less when it comes to FPI. You need to see that from whose point of view we are discussing the risk factor. Then the impact on host economy is higher in when you talk about the FDI. Why? Because FDI also brings with itself the technology also. But there is no such technology transfer when it comes to FPI. And that is why the regulation is quite higher when it comes to FDI as compared to FPI. Now, in this particular article, we looked into this particular concept of net FDI. So what is net FDI? You will get a net FDI. First, you need to calculate what is the gross FDI, what is the total FDI which is coming into the country, minus the repatriation of profit. So let's suppose a foreign investor invested into India. From that investment, he was able to make profits. So if that foreign investor is now taking back the profit, that is what is repatriation of profit. And outward FDI done by the Indian companies. Now, the article tells us that this net FDI has increased. That means what would have increased? This gross FDI would have increased, no doubt. And repatriation of profit would have gone down, and outward FDI would have gone down. Now, we don't know about this repatriation of profit, but yes, we are sure of this thing that outward FDI has gone down as the article itself has pointed out. Okay. Now, why the outward FDI done by the Indian firms is going down? Because of the geopolitical uncertainty. Because whenever the private investor is not sure of the return that it might be getting, it is, likely that the company would be, delaying the investment. That is why the outward FDI currently is on a decline. Now, why this gross inflow has increased? Let's try and understand. This you will be able to understand with respect to the relaxation that we have done under the press note 3. Now, in the backdrop of COVID-19 pandemic, when the Indian companies were not able to perform better, what was happening? The Chinese companies were doing hostile takeover of the Indian company. Now, to prevent the hostile takeover of the Indian company by the Chinese company, the government came up with this press note 3 way back in 2020. Now, what this press note 3 stated, that any country which is sharing the land border with India, that is your China, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, Myanmar, if any entity which belongs to this particular country or which have some stakes in this particular, country, if let's suppose there is a Japanese company, but here in some Chinese company has also invested, it has, let's suppose, more than 20% of the shares, then this Japanese company cannot invest in India directly. It cannot directly come into India. It needs to get approval from the government. That is what was this press note 3. But now what relaxation we have done? The relaxation that has been done by the government in March 2026 is that now the investment from the land border countries can now use the automatic route. That means you don't need to get the government approval beforehand. If the foreign entity has less than 10% beneficial ownership, then the investment is otherwise eligible. That means, in simple terms, earlier this company A, which normally belonged to Japan, but earlier 10% of its stakes were bought by a Chinese company. So now this company could not invest through automatic route. It needs to get approval from the government. But now what the government has said, that if the stake of this Chinese company in this company A is less than 10%, as you can see, then this company can bring FDI into India without government approval. This is the relaxation that we have done, and this is enabling us to exploit the China Plus One strategy. I told you in the first article that I'll be discussing with you that what all steps India has taken to exploit this China Plus One strategy. So this is the step that we have taken, and this has enabled us to get more FDI inflow in the recent times. Okay, so the government noted that even the investment with very small Chinese ownership stakes were facing stricter scrutiny, and that ultimately impacted the FDI inflow when this press note 3 was in effect. That is why the government has relaxed it now. That is all that we have to know when it comes to this particular article. Let's move on to the next one. Now, recently, Nepal has witnessed flash floods, and this has cost a lot of human lives also. And in this respect, India has provided the necessary support to Nepal. So the Indian Air Force has deployed aircrafts which are providing the essential relief material to Nepal. Now, according to Nepal National Disaster Forces, it was because of the rock and ice landslide which took place around the Nepal-China border. This particular topic is relevant from the disaster point of view, which is a part of your GS paper 3. Now, first and foremost, what do we mean by flash floods? Flash, something which is very sudden. And that is what is how you define the flash floods. So it is a sudden increase in water levels that occur during or immediately after intense rainfall. It is a highly localized event. That means it might be affecting a very small region, and it is there for a very short duration of time, typically occurring within 6 hours of rainfall. What are the major factors which are responsible for flash floods? One is the natural factors. Obviously, the climate change is on a rise, and that is why we are witnessing erratic monsoon nowadays. And this year, it is also a El Nino year. That is also one of the reasons why we are getting erratic rainfall. The rain is coming down at a very faster pace in very short duration of time, and that is leading to flash floods. Then, soil saturation could also be one of the reasons. If there is wet or saturated soil, that means the land is not in a position to absorb the excess water, then it could also lead to flash flood events. And then topography and slope is also responsible. For example, in this case, what has happened? The flash flood is because of the rock and ice landslide. It was because of the topography, which accelerate the water flow. So because of this landslide, what happened? The land does not have the ability now to absorb more and more water. So these were the causative factor. What are the anthropogenic factor? The change in hydrology that we are doing. We are encroaching upon the wetlands. So the absorptive capacity of the ecosystem, that is going on a decline. Encroachment and the land use changes that we are doing. These are the major factors which are leading to flash floods. Now, why we say that the flash floods are different from the normal floods? In case of normal floods, they grow gradually. It's not very sudden. But when it comes to flash floods, they occur very fast, within less than 6 hours. And since when it comes to normal floods, they grow gradually, and that is the reason they impact a larger geographical area and they stay for a longer period of time in comparison to flash floods, which are going to impact a local area. They are often localized and they, are going to leave that particular area also in a very short span of time. What are the causes? When it comes to normal floods, it could be prolonged widespread rainfall or snow melt. And when it comes to the flash floods, we have already discussed the reasons. Okay, anthropogenic as well as natural reasons. Other reasons could be the dam failures also. Then, when it comes to normal floods, since they grow gradually over a period of time, we have more time to take, precautionary measures. We can give warning to the people that you vacate this particular area because, this region might be witnessing normal floods. But when it comes to flash floods, it occurs very suddenly. So it is very dangerous and we are left with very little time to give warning to the communities which might be impacted by the flash floods. Just remember this thing. The major difference is flash floods occur very suddenly. Within a span of less than 6 hours, they are going to occur, and that is why they build up very fast and they dissipate very fast. But when it comes to normal floods, they grow gradually, and that is why they are going to stay for an extended period. Now, what needs to be done? First and foremost, the government needs to effectively do the hazard zonation mapping. We need to figure it out. We need to identify based on the previous data set that we have that which are the regions which are more prone to flash floods. Accordingly, localized planning needs to be done. Okay, the planning should be based on factors like topography, soil, and not merely based on rainfall intensity. What do I mean? We know that Himalaya and the hilly region, because of their slope and topography, they might be impacted by the flash floods. So what we need to do? We need to focus upon, soil conservation. We need to focus upon afforestation. So that would reduce the surface runoff and the risk of landslides also. When it comes to the urban areas, what is the area we need to focus upon? We need to focus upon the urban planning. We need to put in place the permeable surfaces, okay? Green and blue spaces needs to be there. And we need to focus upon drainage network. So we need to clean the drainage network on a regular basis, prevent encroachment on the wetlands, and put in place permeable pavings so that the land has the ability to absorb the excess water. And once we know that this particular region A is more prone to flash floods, accordingly, disaster resilient infrastructure needs to be put in place so that we can minimize the loss of life and property. Then we need to strengthen the early warning system so that on a real-time basis, we can track that which area might be impacted by the flash floods. For that, we need to strengthen the Doppler radars and the satellite imagery. And lastly, we need to collaborate with the community. In this respect, NDMA and the State Disaster Response Force should be training the community, and we need to create a volunteer team which should be trained in search and rescue operation. They should be provided training that how to provide the first aid and the basic emergency responses. That's all that we need to know with respect to this particular article. Let's move on to the next one. Now, the next article is dealing with the issue of heat waves and how the funds that are to be provided by the central government to the states, how the states are supposed to use the disaster funds for effective mitigation when it comes to the heat waves. Now, why this question arises? Because recently, the union government has added heat waves and lightning to India's list of notified natural calamities. Now, this list has total 14 such natural calamities. That is why this question has emerged recently, and also because the Finance Commission has given the guidelines based on which the central government would be giving the funds to the state governments for effective management of these disasters. This is something that you can relate with GS paper 3 disaster portion. Now, the first thing that we need to understand is what is a heat wave. Now, heat wave is first of all based on the absolute temperature, that what is the normal temperature which is observed in a particular region. If it is plain, if the temperature is more than 40 degrees Celsius, then it could be heat wave situation. In coast, the normal temperature is 37 degrees Celsius, and in hill, the normal temperature is 30 degrees Celsius. Now, let's understand the heat wave based on the departure from the normal temperature. As we discussed, plain mein normal temperature is 40 degrees Celsius, coastal areas mein it is 37 degrees Celsius, and in hills it is 30 degrees Celsius. Now, if the temperature that is recorded is departing from the normal temperature and it is in the range of 4.5 degrees Celsius to 6.4 degrees Celsius. That means, let's take the example of plain. Normal temperature is 40 degree. If the temperature has been recorded more than 45 degrees Celsius, that means it is a heat wave situation. And when do we say that it is a severe heat wave situation? When the departure from the normal temperature is more than 6.4 degrees Celsius. That means, again taking the example of the plain areas, if the temperature that is recorded is more than 47 degrees Celsius, then we will say that it is a severe heat wave situation. Now, one thing that you need to make note of is this higher temperature, that means deviation from the normal temperature, this needs to be recorded at least in 2 stations in a meteorological subdivision, and this higher temperature or this deviation from the normal temperature should be at least for 2 consecutive days. So then on the second day, the heat wave would be declared. Okay, so this is how you define a heat wave. Now, when it comes to disaster financing in India, it is regulated through Article 280. So under this, the Finance Commission is going to recommend that what all amount of funds the central government has to transfer it to state governments. Now recently, the 16th Finance Commission has recommended that more than 2 lakh crore needs to be transferred to the states disaster fund. And this is 28% higher than what was recommended by the previous Finance Commission. Now, some amount of this 2 lakh crore would be allocated to SDRF, that is State Disaster Response Fund, and the rest amount would be going to State Disaster Mitigation Fund. Now, what is the purpose for which these 2 funds are being created? Why not only 1 fund? Pay attention to the name itself. First fund is disaster response. That means a disaster has already taken place. Now, how to respond after that? So, how to provide essential medical facilities, how to provide essential food items, how to do reconstruction, that all would be financed through SDRF. When it comes to disaster mitigation, mitigation means how to ensure that we reduce the casualty if a region is hit by a disaster. Okay, preventing a hazard from becoming a disaster, because hazards are natural, disaster is not natural. Disaster is when the casualties are very high. So, the Disaster Mitigation Fund would be supporting long-term measures so that we can reduce the risk of a climate event from turning into a disaster. So, how to ensure that the hazard does not become a disaster? Hazard is natural, disaster is based on how well you can manage the risk, how well you can reduce the casualty. If the casualties are very high, then it would be turning out to be a disaster. Okay, so these are the 2 funds. Now, the 16th Finance Commission uses a disaster risk index for doing the interstate fund distribution. And this index is based on certain factors, that is hazard frequency, intensity, exposure, vulnerability, and past disaster related expenditure. Okay, done by that respective state. Now, the Finance Commission has also recommended certain money for the National Disaster Fund, which could be used by the state in case they are struck by a disaster, and when it comes to responding to that disaster, it is going outside the resources that they have. For example, in case of Kerala, when there was landslide in Wayanad region in 2024, the Kerala state does not have the necessary resources to provide the relief and the rescue and the reconstruction. So, it got the fund from this National Disaster Fund. Okay. Now, earlier when it comes to the heat waves, they were at a disadvantage. Why? When they were not included in this national list of notified disaster, what was the disadvantage that they were facing? Now, if a state is suffering from heat wave, all they can do is to carry out mitigation activities or to provide relief. They can spend only up to 10% of the annual allocation to this SDRF fund. However, no such ceiling limit was there with respect to the other disasters that were mentioned in that list. For example, cyclones or floods. So now this new notification, now as this new heat wave has also been added into the list, now this ceiling would not be there. Now why this change was needed? Why it was needed to incorporate heat wave into this particular list? The reason being, According to various survey, it has been pointed out that 57% of India's districts are now vulnerable to heat wave. And that is why, as because of this climate change and because of this El Nino year, the heat wave conditions are going to magnify in the upcoming times. That is why the inclusion was much needed. Now, the article also mentioned about the heat action plan. That means how to mitigate the impacts of heat wave. So in this respect, NDMA has asked the states as well as districts as well as cities to come up with a heat action plan. That means they have to map the heat risk, the communities which are vulnerable to heat waves, and identify the short-term, medium-term and long-term interventions in this respect. Then, when it comes to the heat action plan, the problem is the implementation is very poor. Even today, more than 4,000 urban local bodies and 800 districts do not have such plan, okay, action plan in place. And a review in 2023 found out that why these heat action plans are not effectively implemented. The reason is the financing issue. What is this financing issue? Let's try and understand. Earlier, when it comes to this heat action plan, it was mentioned that they have to self-finance. Okay, so that is why the financing support was limited. But with this recent change, now the states have two financing options. One is under the SDRF, the other one is under the SDMF, okay, Disaster Mitigation Fund. So it can also carry out relief and compensation related activities, and it can also carry out mitigation activities. For example, putting in place cooling shelters, early warning system, etc. And which are the nodal agencies which are going to monitor these funds? So SDRF, it is National Disaster Management Authority, and SDMF, it is National State Emergency Operation Centers. Now, what is the way ahead? How we can ensure that the casualties because of the heat wave is comparatively less? For this, we need to ensure that the heat action plan is project oriented. Let's try and understand this thing in a simple term. Let's suppose I say that when it comes to the slum dwellers, we know that they are more vulnerable to heat wave, okay, because they don't have AC or cooler for that matter. Now, in the heat action plan, the state mentioned that we need to protect this vulnerable community. But it has not exactly mentioned that what all, steps it is actually going to take place. Okay. It has not mentioned that, okay, we are going to put in place 20 water coolers. It has not mentioned that, okay, when it comes to the pavements, we will ensure that afforestation is done so that we can ensure more and more, the region under the shade. So until unless these actionable things are mentioned in the heat action plan, the practical implementation of that heat action plan is questionable. So that is why the article suggests that let's make heat action plans project oriented. Let's convert heat action plans into fundable, locally appropriate projects, and in order to get the requisite technical support, collaborate with the research institutions that you have, NGOs and philanthropic organizations which are there. And let's improve the health surveillance. So better monitoring is needed. Based on that only you are going to provide the relief payout. So for that we need to invest in health surveillance so that we can get accurate loss and damage data. And lastly, convergence and innovative insurance. This is something that we are seeing in the case of Nagaland. Nagaland has come up with a rainfall insurance. So whenever the rainfall is beyond a particular threshold, it gives the compensation to the affected people. So the same thing we can do with respect to the heat wave. So what we can do, we can come up with a parametric insurance which can provide automatic payouts when a predefined temperature threshold is breached. Okay, so these are the necessary steps that we need to take in order to make sure that India is effectively in a better position to protect its vulnerable community from the impacts of the heat wave. With this, let's move on to the last article of today's Analyst. The last article is dealing with Kaziranga National Park. This is something that you can associate with the environment section of your prelim syllabus. Now, what is the context? So, the opposition Congress party has stated that in the state of Assam, they are going to organize a statewide Padyatra on 29th of August. Why? To protest against the proposal given by the state government of Assam. The proposal given by the state government of Assam is that they are planning to reduce the eco-sensitive zone which is there in the Kaziranga National Park. So currently it is 10 km. They are planning to reduce it to 1 to 3 km. So this is the context. As you can see here, the state government has planned that it would be sending this proposal to the central government to reduce the eco-sensitive zone buffer. Currently it is 10 kilometer. It is planning to reduce it to 1 to 3 kilometer. What is the logic which the state government has given in this respect? So the logic is that we want to ensure that adequate livelihood opportunities are created for the villagers which are living nearby the Kaziranga National Park. But what are the concerns highlighted by the environmentalist in this respect? The environmentalist has pointed out that this is going to lead to increased human-animal conflict-related cases. Why? Because the moment you reduce this buffer zone, the Karbi Anglong hills are going to get impacted. Karbi Anglong hills are an important elephant corridor. So if you are going to reduce the buffer, what would happen? The elephants would now be entering into the human, area where the humans are living right now. So that is going to increase the human-animal conflict. And another problematic thing is that with the reduction in buffer, what the state government is trying to do, it is trying to give a boost to the mining and tourism activities in this UNESCO heritage site, which is going to make this ecosystem more and more fragile. Now, why this reduction is much needed? This is something which was highlighted way back, last year also by the Standing Committee of National Board for Wildlife, that the standard 10-kilometer buffer is not feasible. For example, if you take the example of Himachal Pradesh, almost 65% of the state land is already under the forest. So majority of the area is getting covered under this eco-sensitive zone. This is hampering the economic development of this particular state. That is why the state government of Assam is planning to send this proposal to the central government so that it can effectively balance the conservation of the biodiversity as well as boosting the livelihood opportunity for the people who are living nearby this UNESCO World Heritage Site. Now, what is important for us to know is, what is this eco-sensitive zone? This is a region which is defined for special environmental protection because a particular region is rich in biodiversity, it has a fragile ecosystem, and it plays a critical ecological function. For example, this Kaziranga National Park, it has this important elephant corridor. Okay, so it is playing a critical ecological function. The purpose of declaring this eco-sensitive zone is to create a kind of shock absorber. Why we are saying shock absorber? Because certain activities are completely prohibited, certain activities are regulated, and only certain activities are permitted. You can just go through this particular list. This is to ensure that the eco-sensitive zone act as a transition zone from an area which needs higher protection to an area involving lesser protection. Now, who has the power to notify that a particular area is to be considered as ecological sensitive area? It is the central government. And the central government does this. It notifies a particular area as a part of the ecological sensitive area under the Environmental Protection Act of 1986. And the land falling within the 10-kilometer boundary of the protected area would be notified as the eco-sensitive zone. Now, let's make note of certain prelim facts related to the Kaziranga National Park. So, Kaziranga National Park, as we all know, it is situated in the state of Assam, and it is situated between the Brahmaputra River and the Karbi Anglong or Mikhir Hills. It was declared as a UNESCO World Heritage Site by the UNESCO way back in 1985. And which are the rivers which feed this particular national park? So, it is River Diflu and Mora Diflu. This national park is known for the big five, that is one-horned rhinoceros. Majority of the population is found in this particular national park. Royal Bengal tiger, elephant, as we discussed right now, that the Karbi Anglong Hill, functions as an important elephant corridor. Then the Asiatic wild buffalo and the eastern swamp deer. And the entire population of eastern swamp deer is found here. It is also an important bird area. That's all that we need to know in today's Analyst. Quiz would be coming right up next. So don't forget to practice the quiz and please check your knowledge. Till then, keep smiling, keep learning. Have a great day, all of you.